This is a story about being seen. It's about a woman who spent 24 years as a ghost in her own home, a useful piece of furniture polished and positioned for someone else's benefit. Then, in the moment she was told she was worthless, a man who barely knew her name looked at her and saw a solution. Not a treasure, not a beauty, not a prize. A solution. And for a woman who had never been useful for anything but appearances, that was the beginning of everything. This is the story of how a broken promise became a real life, and how a marriage of convenience became a love story built not on words, but on work. If you've ever felt invisible, stay until the end. This is Ilara's story. Her humiliation didn't arrive with a thunderclap. It came quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered in a parlor that smelled of lemon oil and disappointment. Ilara Vance stood beside the mantelpiece, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. Across from her, Alistair Finch adjusted his waistcoat, his movements smooth and practiced. He was a man who inhabited his own skin with an unnerving ease. Beside him, her father, Elias Vance, stood rigid, his face a mask of simmering fury. The fury she knew was not for her. It was for the disruption of his plans. Alistair cleared his throat, a soft, dismissive sound. "It is with the deepest regret, Elias," he began, his eyes flicking to Ilara for a brief, impersonal moment, "that I must withdraw my proposal of marriage." Her father's jaw tightened. "Withdraw? On what grounds? The contracts are drawn, the arrangements made." Alistair gave a small, condescending smile. "The arrangements, it seems, were based on a misunderstanding of my needs. I require a wife who can command a room, a hostess, a partner in my social ambitions." He finally looked at Ilara, his gaze sweeping over her plain brown dress, her neatly pinned hair, her quiet posture. "Your daughter is a fine, modest young woman, but she is retiring. She lacks a certain vitality." The words were polished stones, each one chosen to be smooth and yet inflict a heavy, bruising impact. Vitality. He meant she wasn't charming enough, wasn't beautiful enough, wasn't enough. Her father stepped forward. "My daughter is a Vance. She is educated, well-mannered, and comes with a dowry that would secure the ambitions of 10 men. Alistair held up a hand. "The dowry is, of course, generous, but my needs have evolved. I've recently made the acquaintance of Miss Genevieve Petty, a woman of considerable spirit. Her father is the new railroad commissioner." Of course he was. It was never about vitality. It was about an upgrade. The railroad was coming, and Alistair had found a better train to ride. "So you cast my daughter aside for a better connection?" Elias's voice was low, dangerous. Alistair shrugged, a gesture of finality. "I am merely making a practical decision, as I am sure you, of all people, can appreciate." He then turned to Ilara, his expression softening into a mask of pity that was somehow more insulting than his cruelty. "I am sorry, my dear, if this causes you any distress. I am sure you will find a suitable match elsewhere. Someone less demanding." And with that, he was gone. The front door clicked shut, leaving a profound silence in its wake. Ilara didn't move. She felt hollowed out, a vessel emptied of its purpose. She had spent a year learning to be Alistair's wife, learning the names of his business partners, his favorite meals, the ways of his 6-year-old daughter, Clara, to whom she was supposed to become a mother. All of it, erased in a single, bloodless transaction. Her father finally turned to her, and the look in his eyes was pure, undiluted blame. "This is your fault," he hissed. "Your silence, your plainness. You let him see you as disposable. You have embarrassed this family. She had no defense. In his world, she had failed at her only job, to be a valuable asset. She was no longer a bride-to-be. She was a returned item, a failed investment, a ghost in a parlor that suddenly felt like a tomb. A man was waiting in her father's study. Ilara had almost forgotten he was there. A rancher from the high country named Silas Blackwood, who had been scheduled to discuss a land lease after her fiancé's visit. Now the timing felt like a cosmic joke. Her father swept into the study, his rage barely contained, leaving Ilara to trail in his wake like a piece of debris. Blackwood stood as they entered. He was a tall man, built of rawhide and resolve, with eyes the color of a winter sky. His face was weathered, his hands calloused, and he looked entirely out of place amongst the polished mahogany and leather-bound books. He nodded once, his gaze briefly meeting Ilara's before settling on her father. "Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Blackwood," her father clipped, moving directly to his desk. "Forgive the delay. We had an unforeseen complication." Silas Blackwood's eyes moved back to Ilara, who was still standing by the door, a silent witness to her own unraveling. There was no pity in his expression, just a steady, unnerving assessment. He had clearly overheard everything. The parlor doors were thick, but Elias Vance's fury was not. "A complication," Blackwood repeated, the words flat. Sounded more like a transaction. Her father shot him a glare. "My family's business is not your concern. Now about the north pasture. I need a wife," Silas said, cutting him off. The statement landed in the room with the force of a felled tree. Elias stared at him, dumbfounded. "What?" "My wife died 2 years ago," Silas continued, his voice even, as if discussing livestock prices. "I have a daughter, Daisy. She's 7. She needs a mother. The ranch needs a woman's hand. I came here to lease your land, but I see you have a different asset now available." He looked directly at Ilara, not at her face but at her hands, her posture, the way she stood without fidgeting, without weeping. He saw the stillness in her, the quiet endurance. Her father sputtered, a vein throbbing in his temple. "Are you insane? You think you can just, what, take my daughter as part of a land deal?" "I'm not taking her," Silas corrected him, his gaze unwavering on Ilara. "I'm making an offer to her." He finally addressed her directly, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between them. "I can't offer you silks or parties. My house is sturdy but plain. The work is hard. The winters are harder. There's no society to speak of, but it's a life, an honest one. I'll be a decent husband. I will not lay a hand on you in anger. I will provide for you. And my daughter? She needs someone." He paused. "You need a home. I need a wife. It seems a fair trade." Ilara felt her breath catch. He wasn't offering romance. He wasn't offering rescue. He was offering a contract, as cold and practical as the one Alistair had just broken. But this one was different. Alistair wanted a decoration. This man wanted a partner. He saw her not as a failure, but as a solution to his own problems. He saw her as useful. Her father let out a harsh laugh. "Her? She can't survive a week on a ranch. She's a lady." Silas didn't take his eyes off Ilara. "Is he right?" he asked. And for the first time that day, a spark of defiance flickered within her. A lady? She was a glorified housekeeper, an unpaid social secretary, an invisible cog in her father's machine. She had managed this grand house for years, overseen the staff, balanced the books, endured her father's moods. What was a ranch but a bigger house with more dirt? No, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. He is not. Silas Blackwood nodded once, a gesture of finality. The offer stands. The choice is yours. He wasn't asking her father. He was asking her. For the first time in her life, someone was asking her what she wanted. And what she wanted more than anything was to walk out of that room and never come back. I accept, she said. The Blackwood Ranch was not a place of beauty. It was a place of brutal function. Tucked into a high mountain valley, the land was a tapestry of rock, sagebrush, and hardy grass that fought for its existence against wind and snow. The house was made of thick, hand-hewn logs, chinked with mud, its windows small and deep-set against the cold. It was a fortress, not a home. When Alara arrived, sitting beside Silas on the wagon bench, her entire life packed into a single trunk, she felt a profound sense of dislocation. This was her new reality. The smell of pine and dust, the vast, intimidating silence of the mountains, and the unreadable presence of the man beside her. He hadn't said more than a dozen words to her on the entire 2-day journey. He pointed out landmarks, Broken Tooth Ridge, Widow's Creek, with the detached air of a guide, not a husband. Waiting on the porch was a small, thin girl with enormous dark eyes and 2 braids as tight as ropes. Daisy. Behind her stood a woman with a face like a weathered apple, her arms crossed over a formidable chest. This was Martha, the housekeeper Silas had mentioned. Martha's gaze was openly skeptical. She looked at Alara's traveling dress, her soft hands, and her city pallor, and her expression made it clear she expected Alara to last about as long as the first winter snow. Daisy just stared, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. "This is Alara," Silas said, his voice flat. It was not an introduction, it was a statement of fact. "She'll be living here now." He turned to Alara. "Martha runs the house. Daisy is Daisy." He then began unloading her trunk, the matter settled. The first few weeks were a trial by fire. The work was relentless. Martha watched her every move, offering no help but plenty of silent judgment. Alara rose before dawn, her hands quickly becoming chapped and raw from lye soap and hot water. She learned to cook for the ranch hands, a dozen hungry men who ate with a speed and ferocity that startled her. She learned to patch canvas, darn socks thick as carpets, and churn butter until her arms ached. She learned the rhythms of the place, the pre-dawn quiet, the midday bustle, the exhausted peace of dusk. She did not complain. She did not ask for help. She simply worked. One afternoon, a month into her new life, one of the younger hands, a boy named Caleb, was thrown from a colt. He landed hard, his arm bent at an unnatural angle. The men brought him to the house, panicked. Silas was out on the range, hours away. Martha wrung her hands. "We need the doctor from town, but that's a day's ride." Alara took one look at the boy's white face and the sickening shape of his arm and took command. "Boil water," she ordered Martha, "and bring me clean sheets, torn into strips, and 2 flat pieces of wood from the kindling box." Her voice was calm, authoritative. She had read about setting bones in one of her father's medical texts. She cleaned the wound where the bone had broken the skin, her stomach churning but her hands steady. With Caleb biting down on a leather strap, she and another hand pulled the arm straight. The crack of the bone setting was a horrible, final sound. She splinted and bound it tightly. When Silas returned that evening, he found Caleb resting in the bunkhouse, his arm secured, the panic long gone. Martha met him at the door. "She did it," the older woman said, a note of grudging awe in her voice. didn't even flinch. Silas found Alara in the kitchen, kneading dough for the next day's bread, her face pale with exhaustion. He stood in the doorway, just watching her. He didn't say thank you. He didn't praise her. He just said, "The ledgers are on the desk in my study. They need balancing." It was his way of saying he trusted her. It was his way of saying she belonged. Later that week, she found Daisy sitting on the porch steps, tracing patterns in the dust. Alara sat down beside her, not too close, and opened an old primer she'd found. Without looking at the child, she began to read aloud, her voice soft and even. Daisy didn't look up, but she stopped drawing. Alara read a page, then closed the book and went back inside. She did the same thing the next day, and the next. On the fourth day, Daisy's small voice whispered, "What's that word?" Alara pointed. "That's river." It was the first word the child had spoken directly to her. It was a small victory, but on this proving ground, it felt as monumental as a mountain. Life settled into a rhythm, as steady and demanding as the seasons. Alara found her place not through affection, but through sheer competence. The ranch, which had been a place of masculine disarray, slowly began to feel like a home. There were curtains on the windows now, sewn from old flour sacks. A small garden, coaxed from the rocky soil, produced beans and squash. Daisy, once a silent shadow, was now her constant companion, chattering about clouds and beetles as they worked. She had started calling Alara Ellie. Silas remained a quiet, watchful presence. He never offered praise, but Alara saw his respect in his actions. He started consulting her on which cattle to sell, on whether to hire another hand. He treated her as a partner, a fact that was more meaningful than any endearment. It was this fragile piece that Alistair Finch came to shatter. He arrived in a polished black buggy that looked utterly alien against the dusty backdrop of the ranch yard. Alara was hanging laundry on the line, her sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek, when he stepped out. He looked her over, a slow, appraising glance, and a smirk played on his lips. It was the look of a man confirming a satisfying assumption. "My dear Alara," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "I had heard rumors, but I confess the reality is even more rustic than I imagined." She felt a hot flush of anger. She stood taller, refusing to wipe the flour from her face, refusing to be ashamed of her work. "What are you doing here, Alistair?" "I came to rescue you, of course," he announced, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I made a grave mistake. Genevieve Petty, it turns out, has the strategic mind of a magpie. All glitter and no substance. I realized my error. I realized I valued your quiet dignity all along. It was a lie, and they both knew it. He hadn't come because he missed her. He'd come because his other, better deal had fallen through, and his pride was stung by the news that she had landed on her feet without him. "I don't need rescuing," she said, her voice cold. Silas appeared then, walking out of the barn. He moved with a quiet purpose, placing himself between Alistair and Alara. He didn't say a word, just stood there, a silent, unbreachable wall. Alistair's gaze flickered to Silas, his lip curling in disdain. "Blackwood, I've come to take my fiancée home." "She has a home," Silas said, his voice flat. "This is a squalid arrangement born of desperation," Alistair shot back, turning his attention back to Alara. "Your father is beside himself with worry. He agrees with me. This marriage, if you can even call it that, is a disgrace. We can have it annulled. You can come back, Alara. We can proceed as planned. No one need ever know about this interlude." He was offering her a return to the cage, framing it as a kindness. He thought she was the same weak, pliable woman he had discarded. He didn't see the strength in her hands, the confidence in her posture. He didn't understand that she had been breathing free air for the first time in her life. "This is my home," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even her. "And this is my husband." Alistair laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Husband? This brute? Don't be foolish, Ilara. You think this is a life? Dirt, isolation, and a man who probably speaks more to his horse than to you? I am offering you your life back." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't let pride stand in your way. I am a forgiving man, but my patience is not infinite." Before she could respond, Daisy ran out of the house and hid behind Ilara's skirts, peering out at the strange, slick man with wide, fearful eyes. Ilara instinctively put a protective hand on the child's head. The gesture was small, but it was a declaration. This was her family. This was her place. Alistair's eyes narrowed as he saw the child. His face hardened. "I see. Very well. If you insist on playing the martyr, so be it. But don't think this is the end of it. There are other ways to correct a mistake." He turned on his heel, climbed back into his buggy, and was gone, leaving a cloud of dust and a sense of impending dread hanging in the air. Alistair's visit left a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the coming autumn. Ilara could feel the weight of his threat, the sense that their quiet world was now under siege. Silas grew even more withdrawn, his silence heavier, freighted with a tension that hadn't been there before. He worked from before sunup to long after sundown, as if he could physically exhaust the worry from his body. Ilara felt a chasm opening between them, a return to the polite, distant arrangement of their first days. He was shutting her out, and she didn't know how to breach the walls he was rebuilding around himself. The break came, as it often did in the high country, with a storm. It rolled in without warning one evening, a furious squall of wind and rain that rattled the windows and sent the livestock huddling for cover. The world outside was a churning chaos of blackness and noise. Inside, the house felt small and fragile against the onslaught. Daisy was asleep, tucked securely in her bed. Martha had gone to her own small cabin an hour earlier. It was just Ilara and Silas, trapped together in the main room by the storm's fury. He was staring into the fire, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that seemed to go clear to his bones. Ilara was darning a shirt by the light of a lantern, the rhythmic push and pull of the needle a small, steadying motion in the unsettling quiet. Finally, she put the sewing aside. "He can't hurt us here," she said softly. Silas didn't look at her. "He can," he replied, his voice rough. "Men like him own the world, Ilara. They own the banks, the courts. A man like me just borrows a piece of it for a while." "This is your land," she insisted. "My name is on the deed. But his kind of power, it doesn't care about deeds." He fell silent again. The only sounds, the crackle of the fire and the howling wind. She watched his profile, the hard lines of his jaw, the deep-set sorrow in his eyes. She realized she knew how he worked, how he thought about the ranch, but she didn't truly know him. The man himself was a fortress she had yet to enter. "Tell me about her," Ilara said, the words leaving her before she could stop them. He finally turned to look at her, his expression guarded. "Who?" "Daisy's mother. Your wife." His face closed down completely. "Her name was Sarah. There's nothing more to tell." "I think there is," Ilara pressed gently. "I think you're afraid Alistair will take this away from you, because you've lost something precious before. His jaw clenched. For a long moment she thought he would tell her to mind her own business, that he would walk out of the room and the wall between them would become permanent. But instead, he let out a long, shuddering breath. "She died in this room," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Right over there. It was winter. We were snowed in. The baby, a boy. He was turned wrong. The midwife couldn't get here. I tried. I did everything I could." His eyes were fixed on a corner of the room, seeing a ghost she couldn't. "She was in labor for 2 days. The last thing she said to me was to look after Daisy. The boy was born still. Sarah. She bled out an hour later. I held her hand while she got cold." Tears were tracking silently down his weathered cheeks. "I buried them both myself, just over the ridge. I couldn't protect them. A man is supposed to protect his family. All this," he gestured vaguely at the sturdy log walls, "it means nothing if you can't keep them safe." The confession hung in the air, raw and devastating. It explained everything: his silence, his fear of connection, his relentless work. He wasn't just running a ranch. He was doing penance. Ilara moved from her chair and knelt on the floor in front of him. She didn't touch him. She just looked at him, letting him see the compassion in her eyes. "My father's house had 12 rooms," she said quietly, "and I never felt safe for a single minute. I was just an object, something to be polished and displayed and eventually sold. I felt more seen by you in the first 5 minutes we met than I did in 24 years with him." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, his gaze filled with a raw, unguarded vulnerability. "I don't know how to let anyone that close again, Ilara. I don't know how to risk it." "You don't have to," she said. "We're just 2 people sharing a roof trying to survive. That's enough for now." In the warmth of the firelight, with the storm raging outside, the fortress of Silas Blackwood finally lowered its gate just a crack, and for the first time, Ilara felt like she was truly home. The other shoe dropped a week later, not with the fury of a storm, but with the cold, quiet efficiency of the law. A letter arrived from the bank in town. It was a formal notice thick with legal jargon, but its meaning was brutally simple. The mortgage note on the Blackwood Ranch, the one Silas had been paying down diligently for years, had been sold. The new owner of the debt was a holding company whose primary investor was Mr. Alistair Finch. The letter stated that, due to a reassessment of the loan's risk profile, the new owner was calling the note due, in full, immediately. Silas had 30 days to produce the entire outstanding balance, an impossible sum, or the property would be seized in foreclosure. It was a death sentence for the ranch, delivered on crisp, expensive paper. Alistair hadn't come at them with fists. He'd come at them with a ledger book and a lawyer, weapons far more devastating. That evening, Ilara found Silas in the barn, staring at the letter as if he could burn a hole through it with his gaze alone. "He's going to take it all," Silas said, his voice hollow. "Everything." "We can fight this," Ilara insisted, though she had no idea how. "With what? He owns the bank that now owns my life. This isn't a fight. It's an execution." Just then, another buggy rolled into the yard. This time it was her father. Elias Vance stepped out, looking grim and determined. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He walked right up to them, his eyes fixed on Ilara. "Alistair has made his terms clear," he said, his voice clipped. "This foreclosure is his leverage. He will forgive the debt entirely. He will even sign over the note to you, Blackwood, free and clear." Silas looked up, His eyes narrowed with suspicion. What's his price? Elias's gaze was hard as granite. The price is my daughter. The marriage is to be annulled on grounds of coercion. She will leave with me today. She will then marry Alistair, as was originally planned. This unfortunate chapter will be closed. It was a perfect, elegant trap. Alistair wasn't just trying to get her back. He was forcing her to be the instrument of Silas's salvation. He was making her choose her life with Silas, or Silas's livelihood. To save the man and the home she'd come to love, she had to leave them. To stay would be to destroy them. The choice was impossibly cruel. She looked at Silas, her heart breaking. She saw the flicker of hope in his eyes at the thought of saving his ranch, the legacy he was meant to leave for Daisy, the place where he had buried his wife, followed by the swift, crushing despair of what it would cost. He turned away from her, unable to meet her eyes. He walked over to a stall, resting his forehead against the rough wood. "You should go," he said, his voice so low she could barely hear it. "Go," she whispered, horrified. "He's right. This was a business deal. It's over. I can't let you be the reason I lose this place, and I won't be a man who was bought. Go back to your own kind, Alara. You don't belong here." He was pushing her away. He was trying to make the choice for her, to save her from the hardship and save himself from the humiliation of being saved by her. He was sacrificing their fledgling connection on the altar of his pride and his pain. He was breaking her heart to protect his own. Her father put a hand on her arm. "Come, Alara. It's time to go home." She looked from her father's impatient face to Silas's defeated back. One man offered her a gilded cage, a life of comfortable invisibility. The other was offering her nothing but a hard life he now believed she couldn't handle. A man so wounded, he couldn't bear to accept her help. But he was also the only man who had ever truly seen her. She was standing at the precipice of her life. Behind her was the respectable, suffocating world she had escaped. Before her was a man who was telling her to leave, a future of hardship, and the only real home she had ever known. The choice was hers, and it was no choice at all. Alara took a deep breath, the cold barn air steadying her. She gently removed her father's hand from her arm. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it echoed with the weight of absolute certainty. Her father stared at her, uncomprehending. "What did you say?" "I said no," she repeated, her voice stronger now. She turned to face him fully. "My home is here, with my husband." Elias's face contorted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Have you lost your mind? This is not a home, it's a hovel. That man is a bankrupt farmer offering you a life of poverty and insignificance. I am offering you a place in society, a life of comfort. Alistair is willing to forgive this madness. Alistair is willing to purchase a wife," she corrected him, her words sharp and clear. "And you are willing to broker the deal. You talk about comfort and society, but what you mean is a cage where I am silent and decorative. You have never once in my life asked me what I wanted. You only ever told me what I was worth to you." She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, shock, maybe even a sliver of shame, but it was quickly replaced by his customary iron will. "You are being emotional and foolish." "No," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "For the first time, I am being practical. What good is a comfortable life if you are invisible inside it?" She then turned to Silas, who was now watching her, his face a mask of stunned confusion. His pride was a wall, but she was going to walk straight through it. You are wrong, she said to his back. This was never a business deal. A business deal is an exchange of assets. This was an exchange of needs, and we still need each other. I am not leaving. She walked out of the barn, leaving both men standing in stunned silence. She went into the house, packed a small carpet bag with a change of clothes and the last of her money from her mother. She found Daisy and hugged her tight. I have to go to town, sweet girl. I will be back tomorrow. The next morning, she was on the first stagecoach into town. She went directly to the law office of Mr. Abernathy, a man known for being shrewd and fair. She laid out the situation, the original engagement, the public humiliation, the marriage to Silas, and Alistair's vindictive foreclosure. It's blackmail, plain and simple, the lawyer said, stroking his chin. But proving it is another matter. A man has a right to call in a debt. He doesn't want the money, Ilara said. He wants me. He wants to win. He told me himself that his engagement to Genevieve Petty failed. He's a proud man. What would the people in this town, the people he does business with, think if they knew he was so desperate to have me back that he would stoop to destroying an honest man to do it? Mr. Abernathy's eyes lit up with understanding. Reputation. In a town this size, it's worth more than gold. The confrontation happened that afternoon. Alistair and her father were waiting in the bank president's office, expecting her to arrive, defeated, ready to sign the annulment papers. Silas was there too, standing in the middle of the bank, his face grim. He had come to beg for an extension he knew he wouldn't get. He saw Ilara walk in and his shoulders slumped, assuming the worst. But she didn't walk towards her father. She walked right up to Alistair Finch. The answer is no, she said, her voice clear and carrying through the quiet bank. Alistair stood, his smile tight and patronizing. Ilara, don't make a scene. Oh, I think a scene is precisely what's needed, she said. She turned to the bank president, to the tellers, to the few customers who were now watching, rapt. This man, Alistair Finch, asked me to be his wife. Then he discarded me for a better prospect. When that fell through, he came back, and when I refused him, he bought the note on my husband's ranch to force me to leave him. He is not a businessman. He is a bully, and he is trying to use this bank to settle a personal score. A murmur went through the room. Alistair's face went white, then a furious red. This is slander. Is it? She countered. Then tell me, Alistair, why call in the full note on a man who has never missed a payment? Why now? Tell these people. He couldn't. He was trapped. He could foreclose and prove her right, becoming a social pariah, or he could back down, utterly humiliated. She didn't wait for his answer. She turned her back on him and walked over to Silas. In the middle of the bank, in front of her father and the man who had tried to break them, she took his calloused hand in hers. His fingers curled around hers, a silent, powerful acknowledgement. Let's go home, she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. And together, they walked out into the sunlight, leaving the ruins of their old lives behind them. The public humiliation was more than Alistair Finch's pride could bear. He couldn't follow through on the foreclosure without confirming every word Ilara had said. To do so would make him a villain in the town's narrative, a man scorned and vindictive, which was poison for a man whose business relied on a reputation of cool-headed power. Within a week, the bank president, fearing a scandal, quietly arranged for a local consortium of ranchers to buy the note from Alistair at a modest loss. Alistair and Elias Vance left town on the same day, defeated. Her father didn't say goodbye. He sent a short, terse note formally disowning her, severing the last tie to her old life. It didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a liberation. The ranch, once a place of refuge, now became a place of true partnership. The crisis had burned away the last vestiges of their arrangement, leaving something stronger and more resilient in its place. They worked. That was the language of their growing love. They worked side by side, from dawn until dusk, their shared labor a conversation more intimate than words. He taught her how to read the sky for weather, how to tell which cattle were sickly, how to mend a fence with wire and grit. She, in turn, brought order and warmth to his life, managing their finances with a sharp mind, turning the log house into a real home, and filling the silence with Daisy's laughter. The unspoken question of their marriage, of whether it was real, faded with each passing day. It was real in the way they moved around each other in the small kitchen, in the way he started leaving a cup of coffee for her on the stove each morning, in the way she saved him the last piece of pie. One evening, months later, as the first snows of winter began to dust the high peaks, they were sitting by the fire. Daisy was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet, filled with a comfortable peace. Silas had been watching her knit, the firelight catching the gold in her brown hair. Sarah was like sunlight, he said suddenly, his voice quiet, bright and warm. Everyone loved her. When she died, I thought all the light had gone out of the world. He looked at her, his gaze direct and full of an emotion she had never seen there before. I was wrong. You're not like the sun. You're like the earth, quiet and strong, and everything real grows from you. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, the one that was no longer soft and pale but calloused and capable. I love you, Ilara. The words were simple, unadorned, and they settled into her heart, like a long-awaited rain on dry ground. I love you too, Silas, she whispered back. Time passed, measured in seasons and the growth of their family. The ranch prospered under their joint care. 2 years after the confrontation in the bank, Ilara gave birth to a son, a sturdy boy with his father's winter sky eyes. They named him Daniel. Daisy, now a bright and confident young girl, doted on her little brother, reading to him from her own worn primer. The silence of the Blackwood home was a distant memory, replaced by the sounds of a family thriving. One day, a letter arrived with a familiar, spidery handwriting. It was from her father. He was ill, he wrote, his tone stripped of its old arrogance. He wanted to see her. He wanted to meet his grandchildren. Silas left the decision to her. A week later, Elias Vance's carriage, much less grand than she remembered, pulled into the ranch yard. He was a stooped, frail version of the man who had disowned her. He looked at the thriving ranch, at the sturdy house with smoke curling from the chimney, at the boisterous children who ran out to greet their mother. He looked at Ilara, her face weathered by the sun but glowing with a deep, settled happiness. And finally, he seemed to understand. He didn't apologize. That wasn't his way. But when he held his grandson for the first time, there were tears in his eyes. Ilara watched him, not with bitterness, but with a quiet sense of peace. She had forgiven him long ago, not for his sake, but for her own. She was no longer the ghost in his house. She was the queen of her own small, hard-won kingdom. Years later, Ilara stood on the porch, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the valley. The world was awash in gold and amber, the colors of a life well lived. Silas was in the corral with Daniel, now 10 years old, showing him how to gentle a new foal. Their movements were a mirror of each other, patient, quiet, and sure. Daniel had his father's way with animals, a calm understanding that couldn't be taught, only felt. On the porch swing, Daisy, a young woman of 17 with Ilara's steady eyes and a mind as sharp as a new blade, was reading a thick book on veterinary science. She dreamed of going to college back east, a dream Silas and Ilara fully supported. The quiet, withdrawn child had grown into a woman of fierce intelligence and deep compassion. Ilara smiled, a deep, contented feeling settling in her soul. She thought back to that girl in the parlor, the one who had been dismissed as plain and lacking vitality. What Alistair and her father had seen as a flaw, a lack, was simply a stillness. It was the stillness of deep water, a quiet surface that hid a resilient strength. They had wanted a decorative flower, something bright and loud to put in a vase. They hadn't known how to value a deep-rooted tree, one that could withstand the harshest winds and bear fruit season after season. Her life was not what anyone would have planned for her. It was a life of hard work, of calloused hands and mended clothes. There were no grand balls or important dinner parties. Her greatest social triumphs were the annual community barn dances and the church potlucks. By the standards of the world she had left behind, she was an insignificant woman living an insignificant life. But she knew the truth. Value wasn't something bestowed upon you by others, a price tag determined by your beauty or your father's name. It was something you built, day by day, with your own two hands. It was the sweat you put into the soil, the care you put into your family, the home you carved out of a wilderness. A home wasn't four walls. It was the feeling of a husband's hand finding yours in the darkness. A family wasn't just blood. It was the people you chose to stand with against the storms. Silas caught her eye from the corral and gave her a small, private smile. It was a look that said everything, that he saw her, that he knew her, that he loved her. That was the real measure of her life. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. And in the end, she had learned that being truly seen by one person was worth more than being admired by the whole world. It was everything.